screen and welcome everyone. I don't see any new person. I think everyone who is in this meeting has come to the contributor meeting before. So we will just go through the agenda today. And I think we only have one items on the agenda today is from Caroline for the advanced dependencies.
Yeah. Y'all are in for a treat because I made a PowerPoint for this.
Awesome. Then I will stop sharing.
Be excited.
Cool.
Okay. So what I want to do is give an update about PEP 003. Yeah, we have a lot of PEPs. Advanced dependencies. We've talked a whole bunch about the PEP itself and features and all that. Like, we're not rehashing that at all. Just as a quick reminder of like, here are the high level things we're going to be delivering in this feature. One is a full dependency graph, like a real tree, instead of just an ordered list of what you want Porter to run before you run a bundle. You'll be able to reuse existing installations and have that satisfy a dependency. We also are introducing the concept of a bundle interface so that you can have any compatible bundle. Like if you need MySQL, it doesn't matter if it's on-premise, from a Helm chart, from a cloud provider, you should be able to use that, either an existing installation or like maybe, a bundle you wrote or, a cloud vendor's bundle to work with a dependency. And you don't need to redo the bundle that depends on it to specifically say, oh, I'm going to use this particular one. Big fan favorite here is to be able to pass outputs from one dependency to another. So if you have a dependency, create a database connection string, it can pass it along to the next dependency and you can use it, and so on and so forth. And kind of help a lot with like orchestrating a whole bunch of bundles running at once. And just a reminder to like set scope here, it's only for installing bundles. Full lifecycle management, because like install and upgrade look radically different. What do you do when you uninstall looks even more artisanal, to be honest, depending on what your personal needs are. So that is all going to be in a future PEP. And I don't really have anything in the bag on that. So if anyone else is interested in this and wants to start thinking about it, it's all yours. So where are we right now? Just a reminder of like what Yingrong and I are working on is Porter and the operator. We want to get V1 out as soon as makes sense. Like that's just what we're doing right now, to be honest. And then the operator will closely follow. So we're doing a little bit of pre-planning with dependencies because one, it's fun to think about. And two, we're just trying to get all of our ducks in a row, make sure that we agree on a design. So by the time people free up to work on it, we know what we want to do. But we're not like actively developing it right now. And there's no expectation. Like at the end of this meeting, I will go back to ignoring it. But we do have an approved design for our user experience. And so feel free to go back through the PEP if you want to know, like, what is it going to look like as a bundle author? How do I define my dependencies? What does it look like when I'm running Porter install? What's going to happen? We have a pretty good idea of how we want that to look. But the real truth of this terribly complex feature. And the way we go about implementing it is either going to paint us into corners or make new features possible that are on our roadmap. So the PEP isn't done. We're not in a state where we could start implementing it and be like, get out of the way, Carolyn, I've got time. I'm going to start coding this. We're not at a point of agreement on how this should work yet to be able to do that. So I've been doing little POC work just to vet, like we said, we can do X. Can we actually identify a bundle interface, for example? Can we compare it to installations and decide, yeah, this installation can satisfy this dependency? And then kind of like identifying gaps in Porter especially anything that needs to break before V1. So I'm like slowly sneaking that stuff in right now. So that's kind of what's happening. We're doing refactoring work right now. We're vetting the design and kind of coming up with like guideposts of like, there's some key decisions that we need to make about the implementation before we can actually start. So Yinglong put in the schema changes for the V1 release. So that's already in. We've already messed up your porter.yaml. Sorry, we're trying to get all the breaking changes in for V1 because we really don't want when we ship advanced dependencies to have that bump porter and have it become incompatible with previous versions of porter or existing bundles that are out there. We've worked really hard to get to 1.0. We want it to be able to stay there for a little bit. So the goal is that we're going to implement this incrementally. It's going to go in behind a feature flag. It is going to be implemented side by side with our current dependency solution. And you'll be able to just toggle, do I want to do the old school way or the new way? And it'll just be a 1.2 or whatever the minor happens to be, but it shouldn't involve breaking behavioral changes to Porter. So I'm kind of cruising through. Are there any questions so far? Okay. I've been doing refactoring just to kind of like, otherwise this would be just the biggest big bang you ever did see, because a huge chunk of what Porter does is actually this, just running a bundle, running a series of bundle, understanding how to pipe outputs from one bundle into inputs of another bundle. This represents a serious piece of Porter that is being essentially re-implemented. It's being re-implemented though with a lot of new ideas. This is actually the third time we've improved how we run bundles. So I've added a couple things. We can now query installations and kind of figure out, hey, what installation matches what I'm looking for? Can I reuse it and satisfy a dependency using this installation of MySQL, for example? We've done some prep work we have a converter that converts from Porter's representation of a bundle, a porter.yaml, to a bundle.json, which is the CNAB representation. So I've kind of put a plumbing in there essentially, so that we'll be able to check for that feature flag and make decisions based off of, are we doing dependencies V1? Are we doing dependencies V2? I mentioned CNAB, and I just want to put this out there. We've said this once or twice, but just to be clear, this is something that we want to eventually donate upstream to CNAB. There is a dependency spec that was never 1.0'd. It was never finalized. It was only implemented by Porter, and that's kind of the current thing. We're kind of just using this as an opportunity to really finish vetting how to do dependencies well, get a working implementation, and then essentially convert that into a spec. So one of the things I've been doing is making sure that no matter what we do, this information gets back in the bundle.json. Even though we're not doing the upstream spec work now, the bundles that Porter generates in V1 by the time we're done with this feature should be ready to just be like called the CNAB implementation when we are ready to donate it. So there's just a bit of stuff where it's like, we said we're not doing the CNAB work up front, the spec work, but we are doing, dotting the I's and crossing the T's so that when it becomes a spec, we already implement it. One of the things that we want to be able to do is specify a range of versions that could satisfy a bundle. So you're like, I'm happy to use MySQL version 6. I don't care about the patch or the minors or anything like that. Just keep me on the latest without using the latest tag though. So you should be able to specify a version range and just be like, I'm cool with 6.1.x, for example. And so we've added functionality to Porter to be able to understand how to list tags out of an OCI registry for like a particular bundle and then pick the highest one that matches and implements the bundle interface. So that's all actually merged, which is cool. None of these things really impact how Porter works. They're all just kind of ancillary things. And that's kind of the goal for before we ship V1 is we're just putting in refactoring and moving stuff around and getting ready for the feature and trying to do that in PRs that we have any hope of being able to review intelligently as opposed to like a couple hundred file review. So there'll be open PRs shortly. This is all kind of in a branch right now, and I'm just splitting things off when we know we need it and PRing it to the V1 branch. But we're adding a feature flag so that you'll be able to toggle in the config file, turning it on and off. It will do absolutely nothing at first when we add it, but at least it'll be there from the beginning. And then we can start doing things that are actually related to the V2 of dependencies. But before we do that, we have one more thing, which is we're going to move our existing dependencies implementation into a separate package and kind of like freeze it so that going forward, we can have a side-by-side V2 package. And then we can just toggle between the two, but we're not going to make any changes that would actually touch the V1 implementation of dependencies. We really want to avoid touching any of those code paths, essentially. Are there any questions or concerns about how we're going about this so far? I think this is the most effort we've ever put into doing things nicely and not breaking stuff for people, to be honest. Okay, so I mentioned that we have a playground branch. This is an open PR that you could go look at. You can't try it. When I say playground, I just mean like, I want to go, what would this look like in a data structure? And is there sufficient information, or do I need to go back and like tweak the design, things like that? But it's not like, you can't actually run, for example, a bundle and install all of its dependencies using V2 yet. But we have a couple things. One, we know we can define all the dependencies. We know we can convert it to a CNAB extension at this point and represent it in a way that's compatible with CNAB. We can generate a graph of the dependencies, and that would be super useful for things like Porter Explain. We don't have this yet, but like something we'll be able to add is say, explain this bundle to me. And normally that shows you things like what parameters does the bundle accept? What outputs does it generate? Now you'll also be able to see it depends on these things. And we can actually just give you like a visual graph of like, hey, and this is the hot mess that you're about to install, which, you know, Porter is all about transparency. I mostly have solving that graph implemented. Some of this, when I say implemented, it may not end up being what we merge, you know, but it at least vets the ideas. We may throw it away and then re-implement it, or someone who's probably better at DAGs than me can have a crack at it. But we've at least vetted that, like, we know we have enough information to reuse in existing installations. We know that Porter can support querying and finding them. Picking the latest matching bundle, I already talked about, satisfying the interface. So now we're getting into stuff though with our little generating an execution plan, where these are brand new concepts in Porter. And these are the types of things I think we need to start agreeing on and deciding, yeah, we're going to put this in the PEP as part of the official implementation design. I'm not terribly concerned about like, this is how I'm going to implement a DAG. Like, that's not what needs to go in the PEP, but deciding that we're going to have an execution plan, or we're going to have plugins in order to execute things on Kubernetes versus executing things on Docker, stuff like that. I think we need to have planned out before we actually implement something where you could try any of this out. So I'm adding the idea of an execution plan, and it's theoretical. It just says, this is all the information that Porter has taken from the dependencies, from like that bundle graph that says, here are all the 15 things I'm going to run. It understands I'm going to pass a connection string from MySQL to WordPress. It understands I'm going to need to pull these 6 secrets out of Vault first before we run. And identifying like an allowed order, as in these 5 things could run in parallel. I'm not going to say that they will, but I've identified that there's no dependencies between them and we could run them that way if we wanted to. And the last bit about this, I think I'll just talk about when we get to workflows, is just a reminder of how Porter works. Is we do just-in-time secret injection. We never, like, for example, read a sensitive value and then write it out to a temp file somewhere or keep it in our database somewhere, things like that. We don't make copies of sensitive data and then hold on to it, because that's an easy way to leak data as a bundle runs, and we don't want to leave stuff around. And I think that's going to be a key decider in what's possible when we talk about running these workflows. So execution plans just say, this is what Porter thinks we should do, and this is how it should end up looking. But there's a big difference between, we have this set of tasks and this is, this depends on that, things like that, and going, if I were to execute these Docker images using Docker, using Kubernetes, using maybe Argo, maybe running it with Brigade or things like that, what would it actually look like? So there's an additional step where then plugins come in, and we're going to be able to register a plugin for managing workflows, like an execution of one bundle after another after the other. And the plugin will be able to convert an execution plan and say, I know how to do that with Argo, and I'm going to make a workflow that represents how to do that. And it'll be, here are the tasks I'm going to run, all the environment variables, all the flags, how I'm going to pass the inputs, what's the order. The execution plan says these depend on each other or don't, they're independent. The workflow will actually say, I'm going to run these in parallel, full stop. This is what it's going to look like. And it's essentially how that execution plan runs on a particular workflow engine. It's like the implementation of the execution plan. And the idea is, this is going to be really important for giving end users visibility into what Porter's doing. We don't really have this now with Porter at all, actually. You can very carefully watch the logs as they stream past you and be like, oh yeah, that's what's running right now. But there's no like cute graph where it's like, think of any pipeline. I've done this, I've done that. I'm currently doing these 6 things in parallel, and these are the other things stacking up that'll run next. By having a representation of what we're doing in a workflow that we persist and say, if you came back later, you could be like, this is what ran, and we could draw you a picture, for example, is kind of the goal. We don't have this at all, to be clear. It's something we always wanted, and we've always been doing. I hate this. We've always been doing, like, how little development can we get away with to prove out this idea? And like, do we really need, like, Ralph's smiling because he's the culprit here, actually. How little can we get away with and still end up with something that's useful to the end user? And we've, in my opinion, hit the wall on that. And we need at this point to actually take on real workflows, as opposed to our very simplified, not fully featured workflows. I think we finally just need that. And it's going to do some really fun stuff that I think is pretty critical when you're thinking about doing deployments, which is, I kicked it off, it got halfway through, DNS, I need to do it again, and having workflows and workflow engines, I think, is what is going to make this possible for us. So just thinking about workflow engines is, I want them to be plugins, and I want to be able to use existing implementations, essentially. And what's really fun about this is that as soon as we admit that we're going to have fully featured workflows that are generic, you can just plug in tasks and passing of inputs and outputs and things like that, as opposed to a very highly customized implementation Porter, which only knows how to run one thing in one way. And there's no parallelism. There's a whole bunch of stuff it doesn't have. By finally saying we're going to have a fully featured workflow engine, what's fun is there's like 3 areas in Porter actually that can use this. So it's teeing up more things for us later. For example, a huge security feature that we have planned on the roadmap for later on after we finish 1.0, and depends on this, is the ability to run mixins in isolation and secure what credentials are exposed to which mixins. And that's actually going to come from this feature, and it's going to build on this feature, and mixins are going to be able to start taking advantage of actual workflows. As you know, like right now, if you look at the install action for a bundle, for example, it's just serial tasks. That's it. Once we have workflow, we can start using that actually to run the mixins too, and go, these 3 mixin steps actually aren't related at all. And when I'm designing the bundle, I should be able to execute them in parallel, for example. It's gonna open up a lot of stuff like that. So running the bundles themselves, executing the dependencies, these are all things that are workflows, and we'd like to be able to plug in. We don't want to reinvent this wheel. Basically, I have no interest in reinventing this wheel. So let's talk about, can we even use a third-party workflow engine? I mentioned Argo a couple times because Argo is ridiculously similar to Porter when you look at like how we represent, for example, defining mixins and passing inputs and outputs between them. And I know people pointed that out to me. That's not a unique observation. And so what I'd love to be able to do is pick up Brigade, Argo, ideally something for Docker. That's a big question mark, to be honest. But and then be able to orchestrate and say, Porter knows the 6 containers I want to run in the order, and I want to now represent that as an Argo workflow or a Brigade definition project, or something that works with Docker, and then be able to have that implemented. And then we're not reinventing that wheel, like I said, but this is where I've run out of, this is where I need help, is I had mentioned just-in-time secret injection. Finding a way to resolve secrets while still giving the workflow engine an upfront plan of like, this is everything you need to run, but we don't want to be resolving secrets and just stuffing them in a Kubernetes manifest, or copying it into a Kubernetes secret, which is just plain text and etcd. How do we preserve some of the security characteristics that we worked really hard to have in Porter while taking advantage of a third-party workflow engine? So I need help figuring out what's possible, evaluating workflow engines and just figuring out, well, these ones can do the security stuff we need, or these ones can't. Or maybe we need to implement our own thing for Docker, but Kubernetes has got our back, which would be an acceptable kind of middle point, I think. And then just understanding as we develop a plugin interface so that we could swap out, the Porter operators backed by Argo, the Porter operators backed by Brigade, the Porter operators backed by some very simplified thing that we built that just ships with Porter. Is that doable with all the engines we kind of had in mind? Like, if we made this a plugin interface, will it work? So this is my call for help, I guess. And this is where I'm stopping. I just want to hear what you all think.
So that's a really big dependency. Like,
hell yeah,
an external workflow engine is a huge dependency.
Yeah.
Is there enough value there to want to take that kind of a dependency on?
That is why it's not a hard dependency on a single one. And I was thinking we can ship very slimmed down implementations that, for example, aren't doing parallelism. Maybe they don't support restarts or whatever. Just you have an out of the box thing you can use. But at this point, we have kicked the can so far down the street on saying we're not going to implement workflows, but we got to be honest, like, bundles are workflows, dependencies are workflows, and we either eventually bite the bullet and use something that actually implements it well, and we're not re-implementing that wheel, because we've re-implemented that wheel twice. Neither one is satisfactory. And at some point, either we're re-implementing Argo and we're re-implementing these other workflow engines and doing kind of like a poor man's whatever, you know, because I gotta be honest, like these projects spend a lot, like you said, it's a major dependency for a reason. Like, I feel like we either take a major dependency and make it pluggable and have an interface for it and go, if you want something really nice and stable and supports parallelism and advanced secret injection and kind of is something rock solid, the answer isn't something we implemented in 6 months. It's going to be pulling something else in and just following the Porter methodology, which is we define interface and you know, we may have an out of the box solution that isn't the best, but you can try stuff. And then when you're ready for production, you pull bigger projects in.
Ralph, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm interested, would you be willing to elaborate a little bit on how you think the plugin approach here that you're outlining would affect any expectations of immutability? Are we, is there any impact there that we're not sort of fleshing out?
Yeah. I am so sorry. I have not had chat open this whole time.
There's tons of great stuff there. You totally missed it, you know, Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom doesn't keep it, so it's gone.
I don't anticipate, I don't see paths where this changes immutability. The
Okay.
aspect of bundles that gives us this immutability guarantee of like, I got something that worked and I deployed it. And then 6 months later, I can deploy it again, that same version, that same digest and get the same thing. We get that because we bake in mix-ins into a container, right? And we copy your assets into the container and your Helm chart is in that container and so on and so forth. The running of the Docker container, who kicks it off is kind of immaterial to the whole, you know, repeatable deployment process. I mean, if anything, as you know, like you can run a bundle right now and have it fail in the middle. And like, I think that's more the concern that workflows are really going to help with is the whole trying things again, starting from the last point, starting from the failed job versus.
Right. So
you introduce a lot of difficulty when you try to repeat something and you redo the first 15 steps over each time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me try and rephrase what I'm hearing, and then you tell me whether I'm in the ballpark of what you are thinking here. So basically what I'm hearing is that there might be a pluggability for an outside engine of some sort to make decisions on things like parallelism, on things like injection of secrets, on things like retries and state storage and things like this.
Yeah. So, I mean, at its basic, it's container orchestration. We use either, you know, one-off Docker containers that Porter will run if you're doing it locally, or if you're with the operator, we happily offload that to Kubernetes because that is what it does, right?
Sure.
But when we talk about dependencies, we're orchestrating not the running of one container, but a series of containers that need to hand data off between each other and then retry. And that's where, you know, that's kind of what introduced this whole problem, right? It's
right, of course.
Not running one bundle, but running 15, you know?
Right. And so speaking from the Microsoft point of view, we have customers who are interested in these complex scenarios and have given us user stories that involve precisely this space. So I do want to, you know, say to everybody here that this is an active area where people want to make use of it. Stephen, you had a comment earlier. Do you want to? I think you were kind of joking that it was kind of meta, but I do want you to bring it up.
Kind of. But this is interesting because we went through the exact same evolution with what we were writing, which is much, much more slimmed down than Porter. But essentially, it's the concept of a deployment's kind of management system that only collects information from the user and ships it off to a backend workflow engine to do the hard stuff, and then represents that information back to the user.
Yeah.
And we had on our backend, we were initially using Terraform Enterprise. And a big reason we moved off of Terraform Enterprise as our backend workflow and are using Porter now is because as that external workflow engine, we started running into major limitations. And it's like, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. We'd have to add in this workflow engine as a backend, and we'd have to go modify what Terraform Enterprise is able to do. So I like the idea of adding in external workflow engines as a plugin, because that's kind of the way we went. We said people have already solved workflow engines. We're not re-implementing a workflow.
Yeah.
But you also run into the limitations of whatever backend workflow engine you're wanting to use too. But the nice thing with Argo is it's open source, right? So if you need to do something, just go contribute to the Argo workflow project. So I think that's a lot more flexible. What we're doing now, though, is we have an Argo workflow that we lay down a Porter operator or a Porter installation resource for the operator to pick up. But that's just because we need additional workflows around the installation, such as like wait for it to finish and then go grab the outputs and then take those outputs and throw it on a message bus. But for complex bundles, and our main focus next is going to be this dependency, I think it would be a great idea for Porter to be able to ship that complex workflow off to Argo. But you are going to run into, like you're talking about, just-in-time secret injection, right? Like one thing we're doing now is we collect secrets and ship it off in a message that has to go to Terraform Enterprise, because Terraform Enterprise doesn't really have this just-in-time secret resolution. So there's going to be trade-offs. Whatever, yeah. If using someone else's code, there's definitely going to be trade-offs.
Yeah. I just know that that we've done 2 implementations of workflow engines in Porter, and I've seen, for example, Brigade, they have this implementation. I've seen it's just this wheel that everyone kind of redoes, and we may end up needing to make our own workflow wheel because of secrets or something like that, because there's domain specific logic about what Porter does. But if I don't have to spend the next 2 years of my life making a production grade workflow engine, David, your face.
Well, I want to point out,
I would love not to.
2 well-paid and well-loved years of your life. I just, let's clarify.
Yeah. But I'd rather be solving novel problems with bundles and with deployments and with security and adding SBOMs and things like that,
going
as opposed to rewriting a workflow engine.
It just seems to me that the default response from developers is, oh, let's just write a new workflow engine. Because the ironic thing is my team at F5 actually has a workflow engine that we wrote and open sourced a few years ago. And it's like, what? Just yet another workflow engine, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We have to stop writing new workflow engines.
Thank you. Okay, I'm so glad you're with me on that.
I'm done with workflows. Somebody else do it, and I'll just add to it.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, with timing, I've kind of put this out there. I'm trying to hand it off to y'all. If anyone has interest and time to think about some of these, I'm not thinking about them right now. I've put them out there so I don't have to, and I'm going to go back to V1. And it would be amazing if anyone has time to kind of go, the just-in-time secret injection, is this even possible? Can we even use off-the-shelf stuff and not lose that guarantee about how Porter works? Because that's the most concerning thing to me. We can implement all sorts of stuff, right? But it's just, if we use off-the-shelf, can we keep the secret, and security features of Porter? Because otherwise it's not worth doing, in my opinion. I'm not keen on being the cause of a data leak.
No, so the other thing I'm thinking is that there are 2 sort of categories of user stories that are involved here. And one is where Porter is part of a a fixed workflow deployment system. And Stephen, your usage at F5 might be one of these, it might not. Definitely we have customers running using Porter, and Porter is part of a fixed internal deployment system. The other one is when you're actually using it not to deploy per se out of a deployment system like CI/CD, but rather providing it to a customer, and the customer does the running of it themselves. And so in that sense, it's not really deployment, it's more of a distributional model like a DEB or an RPM or something else. It's, you know, I noticed that these features, a lot of these features are really driven by deployment tools and deployment scenarios. But the usage scenario, like the distribution scenario, and mind you, I use the word deployment to really just think of CI/CD pipelines and controlled environments and things like that. Whereas distribution is the word I use to mean you're going to give the artifact to somebody else and they get to execute it, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So I'll have to do some thinking about it, and we'll talk about it. And if anybody here has any thoughts on that, the distinction and whether there's a, like, for example, if you give this away to somebody, like, do they have to have, if we do something like Workflow Engine, which makes a ton of sense in the sense you're the way you're thinking about it, do they have to install the plugin for the Workflow Engine first in order to execute the bundle?
Yeah, yeah. And this is what I was talking about with having limited out of the box functionality for basically low investment use of bundles, right?
Right.
Just like we have plugins that will write to like, you know, Porter requires Mongo now. So by default, we don't ask you to install Mongo. We quietly run it in a container for you just so Porter can do what it's going to do. And we have other plugins similar where it's like, is this the best thing to do in prod? No. But if you're trying out a bundle and you're not running 20,000 bundles a day as part of like your marketplace, it's probably just fine, you know? And we just kind of want to make the higher grade so scalable, you know, probably more reliable plugins is something you opt into, you know?
Yeah. I think that it will be interesting to see if we can find, you know, more information. More information, of course, is the thing you always want. But it'll be interesting to see whether all of us here have a kind of fixed automation solution in mind, in which for professional productional quality stuff, or whether there are more distributional kind of user scenarios that that are available. I think it's probably the former that is the majority, and certainly to this group. But I'm wondering. I
mean, that bundle, Ralph,
I'm done with that thought.
that bundle we just found the other week. Microsoft is distributing one of their open source projects using a 1100 line Porter YAML file with some intense scripting too. And it's super cool. And it's very complex. And that's the distribution model that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the distribution model that I'm talking about. And so for that model, it's interesting. I should probably go and talk to that group that's doing it. And,
please.
Bring the learnings back here, because I would be fascinated. Like, they would be one of the users to also have opinions about this. Okay, well, actually, I'll do that. I'll see if I can't hit the users that we have and try and bring more opinions to bear on these bullets. That
would be. I just want to know more about that bundle.
Yeah.
I've got the source and I've been wading through it for the past couple of days. But
maybe we should invite them to have to this meeting actually, and describe their usage, and just have them talk about how they thought about it, how they used it, and so forth. That would be fun to hear.
Yeah, I'm waiting for them to tell me that putting your entire bundle logic in one YAML file with no organizational capabilities doesn't scale at the level they're using it. But I don't know. I don't even want to assume that.
I'm pretty sure they brute forced it. Given the level of scripting that they had done in it. when I reviewed it. But on the other hand, I brute forced a few bundles already, and it worked great. So
Yeah. It's amazing how far
Okay.
you can go without.
I'll take that action item. I'll go out and see if I can bring in some of the users that are in our space, and see if they have opinions about how this might work and so forth.
Were there any thoughts in general just about our velocity, where we're heading, and kind of what the roadmap and next couple months look like for making dependencies happen? I don't know if people had a more accelerated timeline in their heart of hearts.
Well, we're not super ready for it right now, but it's definitely high on our list. I wanted to kind of circle back to the whole workflow concept just real quick, because I'm trying to wrap my mind, especially having done all this stuff in Argo recently, on what this might look like. So we would be talking about Porter having a complex execution plan that would understand all of the dependencies and different levels and know the execution order that things need to be set out in, or essentially know like these all depend on each other. Yeah. And then that would get passed off to, say, a workflow plugin, and that workflow plugin could translate that into its domain in order to run. So like when I'm thinking about Argo, like I would still want to take advantage of Porter to actually run all of those. So my Porter would kick off an Argo workflow that would kick off Porter installations, right? That's kind of where, and then each dependency is its own installation, and then the entirety of all dependencies together is a separate installation in and of itself. Like, does that make sense? Is that kind of too far down the rabbit hole?
I mean, I have the same concern. I'll just put that out there, that this may be too complex, or too, like, by extracting workflow from Porter, this may make it not a solution we want to go down because of exactly what you just said. So that's kind of the vetting feedback and stuff we need right now before we invest any code in it, right?
Yeah. Because I mean, like, I wouldn't want Argo to be the one that has to figure out how to run Terraform, right? Or
yeah,
run,
no. Yeah.
You know, whatever. Like that is the power of that Porter gives me right now. Is I can do my mix-ins, and then it handles all that stuff for me.
So when I originally thought about it, like translating it to Argo, for example, what I was hoping would be is that the Argo plugin would go, these are the bundles that need to be run, and that Argo tasks would be the invocation images. It wouldn't be calling to Porter, who then would turn around and kick its own pod, like how the operator works right now. Right. The goal would be that we would encode just the bundles, just the invocation images that need to be run, and then occasionally maybe calling to Porter to do business logic to provide inputs to the next step. So for example, one way I was hoping we could do just-in-time secret injection is like before each invocation image or set of images that need a new secret, we'd run Porter quick. Porter would get that data out and then pass it through. But I have no idea how Argo handles data passing between tasks, and if that fits with our security expectations, that's where things get fuzzy. But I really want to avoid having one of the tasks in the execution plan be running Porter, who then kicks off an invocation image. I want the plan to be running the actual invocation images.
The argument is that does give you just-in-time secret injection inside the workflow engine too, because you can take advantage of Porter doing that for you. So
no, it's seriously, it's a level of like, one, if you look at a graph of what's actually happening, are you just going to like lose it and pull your hair out and run out of the room screaming, because like the one way to do it, would just be to call Porter. But I'm a little concerned that is going to be very convoluted and difficult to kind of wrap your head around and work with in production. When you're like, it kicked off a series of 6 things that calls Porter again, and then, is then making another pod that runs on Argo or something like that. it gets recursive.
Yeah. The other thing is passing outputs from one Argo workflow stage to another. Currently, when you have a Porter installation, and we talked about this, right, with trying to grab the Porter outputs from the operator, because we're running things in the operator, it requires parsing of Kubernetes job logs, which is just too brittle in my mind to really.
And the solution
So
for that is the gRPC service, right?
Right, exactly. So it feels like gRPC and dependencies kind of end up going hand in hand with this, because we need to be able to query Porter real time, maybe for some of this dependency resolution.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. If you're orchestrating the workflow through Argo, okay. Because to be honest, like it's near one-to-one mapping what Porter's bundle looks like and what Argo looks like. If you wanted to get the output from the last step or whatever, and it's a gRPC service, is Argo going to call a gRPC service? It wants to run a container, at which point,
right,
you can run Porter and get that information. You don't need the gRPC service. The gRPC service is interesting when you have your own integrations that are happening and you don't want to have to call into Porter just to read our database. It kind of gives you that direct database access. But I don't see gRPC coming into play for this PEP for, advanced dependencies. I think we can avoid that pretty well. Famous last words. This is my 64K moment.
interesting.
So I don't have a lot more to say on my side. What I do want to say is that I want to thank you for all the thought that's got into this presentation. Because you're right, we're at the point where we need to make a really hard decision and put some work into solving this area of problems. And either we walk forward into a depth of complexity that is, something that we really need to tackle, or we make some decision whereby there's a boundary of the complexity that we do here, and that's going to be a known issue and so forth.
Yeah.
But we're at that decision point. So, but you've done a great explanation here of the requirements and the possibilities. So I want to thank you so much for that. This is, I would love to, we're going to have to think about this and really look at it. I will definitely be talking to the users that I know. And Stephen and everybody else should definitely speak up.
Yeah, I think I'll probably just start maybe just like a HackMD, and if people have experience with Argo and want to comment on like how it passes secrets between steps and things like that, or just if you have experience with any pieces of this, or just even like the workflow engine that y'all wrote and stuff like that, if any of it feels relevant, you want to just kind of like give some brain dumps. I think that'd be really helpful, so we can kind of just kind of figure out where to go from here. And because I just don't have time to like learn Argo at the moment, for example. So if you know the answers to any of these, it'd be really helpful to fill in the blanks. Cool. I will start just a brainstorm doc and link that out to everybody. And yeah, we'll just chew on this while we work on V1.
That sounds great. Also, is there a posted version of this presentation?
There will be. I wrote it 5 minutes before this.
If you can pull off presentations this coherent in 5 minutes before, you have massive skills.
Serious PowerPoint skills.
You could be a PM even. I'm not sure, but it's possible.
Ralph, I started out as a PM, right? You remember this?
I did not know that, but I am now unsurprised.
You got to sit on these things because otherwise people ask you to make more PowerPoints.
Yeah, you don't want to back yourself into too much pain.
Yeah. Well, I will link this out and the design doc. Thanks everyone for coming today.
Thank you.
See you later.
Nice job, Carolyn. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mark.
nice presentation. Thanks.